So the brain is generally what we're talking about, and here you have a picture, the overall view of the human brain. A friend of mine, Jeremy Wolf, always said make sure you draw on the nose. So your nose is over there, your eyeball's here, and then there are all these various structures. The cerebellum in the back of your behind your head is where a lot of rapid motor control kinds of things take effect. A whole bunch of structures. All of this crinkly stuff up here is the cortex, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. By the way, these little things sticking out right here called the olfactory bulbs, those are the things that actually go into your nasal cavity that does sense of smell. That's actually a part of your brain that sticks out into your nose. And another part of your brain that sticks out is actually your retina, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The parts of the brain I want to talk about today are, this lesson and next, of course, are the parts that are involved with the human vision system. And those are poorly drawn here on this schematic. It's just ugly, but it's actually much clearer. So again, here we have your two eyes. Okay, again, now your nose is up here. And you'll notice that coming out of each eye is what's referred to as an optic nerve, and they sort of cross in this funny way at what's referred to as the optic chiasm. They then make a way stop. They make a stop here, down in here, in the lateral geniculate, and then the lateral, which we'll talk about, and then the lateral geniculate has projections up into something called the superior colliculus. And a lot of it goes to what's called the visual cortex. And we're going to talk about that. By the way, we describe these things as if it's a flow of information going up. And that's partially because as computationalists, we like to say, well, first we do some low-level processing at the detectors and the retina, and then it goes up to these way stations where various kinds of things happen, and then up for higher-level processing. The reality is somewhere between 80 and 95% of the projections into, for example, the lateral geniculate are actually from the cortex back down. So the engineers amongst you will say, oh, that's got to be feedback of some sort. Well, indeed, it probably is, and it's still stuff that we're just slowly getting a handle on. So take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. In fact, well, take everything I ever say with a grain of salt, but in particular, I'm only going to give you a relatively simplistic view of what's going on in the vision system. It's also a slightly dated view because while I'm try to be pretty current about certain computer vision things, there's a massive, massive field of neurophysiology and human vision. So I'm just going to give you some of the highlights. And it'll give you a general overview. And I encourage you to read more as we go forward. One thing to say also before we continue forward is sort of the anatomy and physiology of the brain really reflect the computational complexity of vision. So to give you an example, you have auditory nerves that come from your cochlea that go into your brain, and those nerves, there's two of them, one for each ear, and those nerves have somewhere around 30,000 nerve fibers in that bundle, okay? The optic nerve, each one coming out of here, that has somewhere around 1 million fibers. Okay, 30,000 for hearing, 1 million for vision from each. Likewise, and we'll talk more about this later, we're going to talk about visual cortex, this area back here. So far, you can, again, plus or minus, somewhere around 30% of your cortex, right? The cortex being the most recent part of the brain in terms of evolutionary structures, and we think of it as being the sort of the human element. Somewhere around 30% of the cortex is seen to have something to do with vision, as opposed to say 3% for hearing and 8% for all of somatosensory touch. So again, the complexity of vision is not only showing up when you look at your problem sets and you say, how could this possibly work, but is also reflected in the detailed structure of the human anatomy.